Hello, students. In this little mini short lesson, we are going to look at the antagonist and the protagonist. We're going to go into details figuring out who is whom, as well as how can you remember each role for these characters. Now, the protagonist The protagonist is always known as the hero of the story. Now, the protagonist of the story is the main character and one of the most central to the action of the story. The protagonist is the center of the story and makes key details and experiences the consequences and decision. So the protagonist is always the hero of the story, the good guy. So this is a good person. So now we're going to look at the antagonist. So who is the antagonist? The antagonist is the villain. Now, if you can put it this way, the way that I always remember the roles of these two, the antagonist will always be the person who's antagonizing the protagonist. If you can link the words antagonist with antagonize, then you'll be all set. So the antagonist is a person, the thing, or force that works against the protagonist. So remember, the antagonist doesn't always have to be another character. It can also be a force of nature. So the antagonist can also be a hurricane, a flood, or a storm. So, of course, stories can have multiple protagonists. It can have multiple antagonists. And the dynamic character can even be switched between roles as the story develops. So if you're unsure if someone is an antagonist or a protagonist, remember that the antagonist antagonizes the protagonist. Now let's get into a little scenario to check out these points. So this story, you'll decide who's the protagonist in the story, and you'll also decide who's the antagonist in the story. So let me draw some waves because this story takes place on the water. Let me also draw a boat because in this story, the characters are going out on a boat. They are going sailing. Put some fish in the water. Yep, I'm going to draw some fishes in the water. So let's get to it. Peter and Benjamin set out sailing across the ocean. All their lives, they have dreamt that they would one day sail from the United States to the Bahamas. They gathered all their supplies they needed to last for 7 days. Day one, the sun was shining and the air was cool. The boys were overjoyed about their voyage. So overjoyed. Suddenly, the skies got dark and the sea began to roar. Peter and Benjamin were trapped in the middle of a storm. So imagine the thunder striking. Clouds are thick. Now, the boys braced for the storm. They trapped themselves under the boat and called for the Coast Guard. Finally, the Coast Guard came and was able to rescue them. The boys smiled and hugged the Coast Guards. They were grateful beyond measures. As they approached and land, they started to make plans to go out to sea again. So clearly these boys are brave. Now let's get into it. Who is the protagonist? Remember, the protagonist can be characters, the person who are the heroes in the show. So we can say the protagonists, the characters. We have Benjamin, we have Peter, but we also have the Coast Guard. In this case, the Coast Guard was the hero because the Coast Guard rescued them, right? So I'm going to say, the protagonists are the good guys, the heroes. But then we want to know who the antagonist is. So remember, not in all stories, the antagonist is not always going to be a person. The antagonist can be nature. In this case, the antagonist was the storm. The storm was set against them. The storm was set to ruin their time. But the day was saved thanks to the Coast Guard. So as you guys read, remember, pro is always positive, the good guy, the hero, right? Antagonist is always the villain. So the protagonist is always going to be the hero in the story, while the antagonist is always going to be the villain. And remember, the villain is not always a person. It could be nature, amongst other things. Until next time, take care of yourself.